Well, we almost finished our form. Let's work on the last type of input here, a select input, a dropdown. The HTML code can be found here. And here I want to do two things. I, of course, want to use Vue.js to get the value, but I also want to Vue.js to populate this select, this dropdown with options. You see right now, it's a normal select input here set up with some bootstrap styling, and then we would add a couple of options like this. Of course, options should also contain a bit more information than just an opening and closing tag. The reason why I only have an empty option here is that I want to add them dynamically. So let me go down into my data property, and here I first want to add an array of options I want to populate my form with. I'll name it priorities, so a number of different priorities, and here we got high, medium, and of course low. So these are the three options I want to use. Now to use that, I'll scroll up to my select here, and the first thing I'll do is, of course, on my option here, I want to set up a v-for loop to loop through my priority in priorities, like that. Priorities here, of course, refers to the priorities array I set up down there. This will create all these options. Now I can also add it here, priority, by simply outputting it like this with string interpolation between the opening and closing tag. Now this will add a couple of options, as we can already see here, high, medium, and low. Now of course you could select another option by default by binding to the selected property, the selected attribute with colon selected, and then as a value for determining if this should be selected, we could simply check if priority, so the value of the current loop iteration, equals medium. This is a string with single quotes. Now this will, once this reloads, select medium by default. And I of course can still switch to high or low, but now we change the default by simply adding this property binding, this attribute binding here with the colon and the name of the attribute, and then the logic which determines if that should be bound or not. Because selected, keep this in mind, is an attribute which in the end wants a true or false data field. So it wants to know whether this should be a selected or not. So the value we pass to it has to be a condition giving us back true or false. And I do this by checking if priority is medium. So I'll structure this over multiple lines so that it's easier to read. With that, we set up our option. Now, of course, I want to bind this input. We're not doing that right now. We're only populating it with values. So how do I bind my select field here, my select input control? Of course, we do that by using vmodel again. Now, important, vmodel is now not used on the individual option, but on the overall control, which is select here. So here again, we use vmodel, and I want to bind to, well, a new property I'll create for that. The property I will create is simply named, let's say, selected priority. And I will set this to high by default. And now if I go back there and add selected priority as the model to which I'm binding, and I'll let this reload, you now see high is selected by default. Yes, I do have my check to override this, but it is in the end overwritten by the model we're binding to. So that's another way to set the default. We do have our vmodel, which has a default value, selected priority, and this will always override whatever I set here with selected. So selected will only work if we're not using vmodel here, or if we're not pre-populating vmodel with a default value. So that's the reason why I will remove this code. Keep in mind you could use it though if you don't have a default value. And with that, I set this up as I wanted with a default value of high selected. Now this also of course means that it works the other way around, so that if we change the selection, it will update our property. Therefore, we can output it here, selected priority, in this paragraph. And with that, finally, you can see high down there. If I change this to low, it changes there too, as it does for a change to medium. And that is the last type of input field. I wanted to show you the last type of form control. We have the dropdown, the select control here. With that, you learned about the basic HTML controls we do have and how to use Vue.js to get the values, to set the values, to work with them all the time using vmodel. Now in the next video, we'll have a look at how we can build our own input field, our own form control by using components. So let's dive into that in the next video.